Hey everyone, I am Kat B.
And I'm Angel Street.
And we are the hosts of the webcast UFOT.
But we love coffee and UFOs.
Hi, I'm Stephen Bassett, Executive Director of Paradigm Research Group, and I'm a really big supporter of coffee and UFOs.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Coffee and UFOs. I have a great guest on today, Earl Grey Anderson, and he is a MUFON investigator. Earl, I've seen him out and about on the virtual reality world in the UFO community, and he is he's in the field doing the hard work. And just like Jesse Peak in last week's episode, I really wanted to ground Coffee and UFOs in real world investigation as much as possible, because more and more I am taking very seriously the enormous importance of in-field investigation. Of course, all the other FOIA and other document-related research is extremely important as well. But oftentimes, that gets the headlines, that gets all the interest these days. Whereas when I was growing up in the 90s and in the early 2000s, it was the investigators who were going to libraries, meeting witnesses, taking samples in the field. That's what I grew up on. So I'm kind of going back to that a little bit with Coffee and UFOs. So I hope you'll stick with us on this journey. Earl Grey Anderson is MUFON's State Director of Southern California. He is an active member of MUFON's ERT, the Experiencer Resource Team, and hosted both Experiencer workshops at this year's MUFON Symposium in Denver, Colorado. Earl has personally investigated over 800 UFO reports and specializes in Experiencer high strangeness cases. He has appeared on multiple radio shows, podcasts, and TV shows, such as Unidentified with Demi Lovato, the Travel Channel's Storming Area 51 special, and the season finale of Motor Trend Television's Motor Mythbusters Cars versus UFOs. Earl will be, I wonder who won. Earl will be representing MUFON's Experiencer Resource Team in many of a capacity coming up in the in the next year or so, or on other podcasts. So keep an eye out for Earl. All right. He also teaches an accredited course in ufology at Los Angeles' Otis College of Art and Design. A native of Southern California, Earl is also known as a published singer-songwriter guitarist with 3 CDs under his belt. Earl dotes on his 3 children and 3 grandchildren and lives happily with his wife, Lisa, and his 2 cats, Gigi and Thor. Cheers, Earl. Welcome.
Hi there, Alan. How are you doing?
Good, brother. I see you have your brew.
Yes, I do indeed. It's kind of late. It's almost time for an IPA, but we're doing coffee. You got to stick with a program here. It's coffee and UFOs.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you for keeping with the spirit of it all. The coffee I drink is Alien Coffee Bean, which everyone knows is my favorite cosmic kick. But yeah, it's a little bit on the later side, but it's going to be a late night, I think, tonight, and that's a good thing. Sometimes the best thoughts, I feel like, kind of emerge from our minds in the later hours, in the earliest hours and the latest hours, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, the neural synaptic processes, they're a little different later on.
Yeah, exactly.
I notice, sometimes right when I'm ready to fall asleep or just kind of falling asleep is when I'll get certain ideas or something will come together and make sense finally. And you're always wanting to have that. Working as a field investigator for MUFON, which is my passion.
Yeah. Have you had a moment like that where you're working on a case and you've had an aha?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I'm blessed that I actually experienced this thing called synchronicity, and sometimes it'll be a synchronicity is a meaningful coincidence. And it seems to happen to a lot of people that are either experiencers or have had a close encounter with a UFO.
Mhm.
And I think that it's kind of maybe an after effect of that. There's certain, I guess I could call them gifts, that people are kind of left with, whether they've had a pleasant experience or they've, reptilians came through the wall. It can be a horror show or this benevolent thing, but people seem to all be left with, they are left changed when they have an experience.
True. Yeah.
And synchronicity is one of those things,
It is. And I feel like sometimes we go through certain periods of our life where we are mentally, the effect of that are synchronicities, like our state of mind. I feel like when we're kind of like keyed into the force or the flow or, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in the force. I think that is a thing. And
yeah.
Because I've experienced this stuff, where, you'll have these cases that suddenly come together and you realize that, like I'm working on a few cases right now that have to do with the children of officialdom, where their parents a parent was working in a deep underground lab with computers and things like that way back, in the late 1950s, early 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, it's not this random thing. It just seems too meaningful, and it just, that's synchronicity. It's a meaningful coincidence, and I love it when it happens, and it's sort of I think that's an after effect of having been close to a UFO or an anomalous being.
Right. Well, that's why when growing up, UFO was synonymous with paranormal. They were indistinguishable. It was the same category. If you believed in UFOs, you believed that it was considered a paranormal subject. And now there seems to be this kind of separation that's occurred. But before we talk more about that, can you tell us more about your background, how you got interested? And you were already, before we started recording, teasing a story about your mom. Sure.
Well, I get asked a lot about how I got interested in this stuff. And I tell people, this is something that seems like it was born in me. Mm-hmm. One of my earliest memories is my dad had built this swing set, and back in the, early 60s, people tended to be handymen and doing carpentry and stuff. And there was some leftover wood, and this thing had monkey bars on top. And so I sort of put together a reasonable facsimile in my mind. Sure, it didn't look like a spaceship, but it was my little spaceship. It had a control panel that I painted on. And I just begged my dad to haul it up to the top of the monkey bars. And, we didn't have helicopter parents back in those days. You got away with a lot more.
Yeah.
So I climbed up there and I was waving and singing at the sky. And I remember my mom, looking through the kitchen window and going, "Earl, who are you singing to and who are you waving to?" And I said, "The space people, Mom. I'm waving and singing to the space people." And here I am, it's 60 years later and I'm doing the same thing still,
waving and singing at the space people.
and singing to the space people.
Yeah.
But my mom, maybe a year after that, and that's one of my first memories. But a year after that, I was 5 years old, and my mom told me this weird story about, that I used to work. We all knew that Mom worked for Howard Hughes. That wasn't news. That was known in our family. She was one of his two private secretaries over at the old Sepulveda, California Hughes building. And he at that point, he was a germaphobe. He was afraid of people. I mean, as long as my mom knew him, she only saw him in person once, and that was a mistake. She wasn't supposed to. They would give an all clear, and then people would leave the building at the end of the day. And they gave the all clear to early one day. And so she opens up the door, and there's a long hallway that went out to the parking garage. And there's Hughes at the end of the hallway with a little briefcase and a hat. And she said that he looked Chaplin-esque. and just kind of saw the silhouette of him in the open sunlight of the door.
Yeah.
And he stopped for a second, and I guess she said that he kind of shook his head and walked out. And those were the stories she would tell everybody, right? You know, I mean, you can work for Howard Hughes, and you don't need to sign NDAs and stuff after that. But what she told me when I was 5 was very, very strange. She said that she was sent out to this secure site in the middle of nowhere. She said it was in the American desert. Which one? I don't know. I've done a lot of research. I think it was probably close to Los Angeles, so it may have been, you know, the Janet Airlines over to Area 51, although I don't think they had an airline yet back then. We're talking 1956, 55. But she said they took her out to the desert. She said that there was this shack where it was like a concrete bunker. It didn't look like anything. She said that it looked like it would have tools or something in it. And they opened the door, and there was an elevator that just went down. You know, it went down. No second story to it. And that was the first inkling that she had that something was out of the ordinary. She said that she got into this elevator, and she thought that it would probably just go down a little ways. And she started getting scared because it kept going, and she was feeling a feeling of vertigo. She was feeling butterflies in her stomach. Is how I think those were the words she used. She said when the doors opened up that there was a little bustling city down there. She said that they got around in golf carts, that there were lots of scientists, German scientists down there. She said that they were working on esoteric projects. She never told me what projects they were. And you know, when I was a kid, it was just this weird story. But as kids, we sort of have this look at life that's more sort of like a magical realism thing, you know?
Yeah.
So she told me the story, and I guess she thought that I forgot about it. But then when I was in 4th grade, I actually went in front of my class, and I gave like a little, I gave a presentation. It was, you know, talk about your parents. Talked about my dad, and had a whole lot of, you know, my dad just had a normal job. But then I talked about my mom. And, you know, and after that initial conversation, my mom had talked about aliens and UFOs as though it were a very real thing. It turns out that my mom kind of had this other secret life that the rest of the family wasn't really privy to. Now, since that time, well, you know, in 4th grade, after I gave my little talk, they did a parent-teacher conference, and my mom came into school. She drove me home from school, and she had a lecture. She said, you know, son, how do you remember that? You were a little baby when I told you about that. It's not your fault. I didn't tell you this, but your mom could go to prison if you talk about that. The people don't know about underground, you know, laboratories. They don't know about little cities under the desert, and they don't know about UFOs. And you can't talk about that stuff and talk about me. Your mom could wind up in prison.
Yeah.
And but that's kind of where the UFO bug really took hold. That's a young.
Yeah. What was the first movie that you saw that was UFO or alien related that stuck with you?
Oh, gee. I saw everything, War of the Worlds and all that, the remake that was in color, when we were kids, I guess. I loved science fiction. 2001: A Space Odyssey. I forced my parents to take me to that when it came out. I was 10 years old. And I guess it was 1968. Yeah, so I had the bug, and I loved the movie, and my parents, they were just confused, even my mom, and she was privy to this stuff.
Yeah, I don't think 10-year-olds go out and see movies like 2001: Space Odyssey these days. There's not much like it, to be honest.
It all happens in the head. That film, the action takes place in your mind, it's just these wild, far-flung concepts. But for some reason, I've just always loved that. From my earliest memories, When back in 1977, my mom, now I found out that people that work in deep underground bases, that it's a commonality for people to have cancers. This is kind of a known thing. I've talked with Richard Souter, who's written quite extensively about, he's got like 4 books on underground bases. My mom kept on having these unrelated cancers, and it was 77. She went in for a screening, and it came up clear. She was fine. And so we were going to go out and celebrate. I was kind of there, to support my mom. And I guess I was about 17 years old at that point. Mm-hmm. No, it's a little older than that. I'm sorry. I think I was 19. It's 77. Yeah, it's 19 years old. So we went to see this new movie called Star Wars. And when the curtains were closing, my mom just blah. Because she hadn't talked about this stuff since I was a wee little guy. But it was as though she couldn't help herself. Now, we were in Santa Monica. That's where her doctor was, and that's near where the Hughes building was. And I think that the stars just kind of aligned that day. Yeah. And little did I know this was going to be the one big disclosure thing that she was going to do. But she told me, son, Star Wars is not far-fetched. The different species, races of extraterrestrials and the different spaceships, that's a real thing. The government knows about it, but they're never going to tell the world. So they're never going to tell everybody out there because they're afraid of how people would react. And that so there were like a couple of times Mom broke her NDAs, apparently. Since then, I've talked with a couple of people in officialdom who actually cracked open my mom's files, and they confirmed this for me. In fact, one gentleman who you'd probably know, but I don't know if I am at liberty to mention his name, but he is in officialdom, and he mentioned to me that when I was in 4th grade, after I went and I gave my little speech, my mom actually reported on herself. So they knew that she had talked too much to her little kid, and that I spouted off in front of people and was telling national security issue secrets.
Which that's only if somebody believes it, right? Like if it's coming from a kid, they may not take it that seriously.
Well, kids teased me about this just from that point on until I got into high school, and I was playing in rock bands. Suddenly, if you're playing in rock bands, then you're cool, and people stopped teasing you back then. But it made my the rest of my childhood kind of miserable because people would think I was a UFO, a real nut, actually. Because people don't talk about this stuff out there.
Yeah, it's gotten a lot better now. I mean, you were on Demi Lovato's show. This is a celebrity that's come out and is very open about it, and it doesn't seem to be hurting her career. I mean, I know she's kind of already past that tier. It's not like she's working in an office job or something like that. But more and more people come out.
It's changed.
Yeah, Rob Lowe came out, and his family's all into this stuff. I mean, so it's definitely changed. It's not, for some careers, it's not career killing. But I imagine, if you were in like a healthcare job and you start talking to the, lead physician that you think you were an abductee, I don't know if you would still have your job.
I don't know. Half of the people I work with in the ERT are doctors. George Medich he heads up our team, and he's a orthopedic surgeon before he retired. Also a MLB baseball star. He played for.
Right. Well, of course, it's subjective.
Yankees, did he? I think he played for you guys. But I think there's still some stigma around the subject.
Yeah.
That's the Robertson Report, 1952. I mean, the government decided how they're going to deal with it in public, and they decided ridicule was the way to go. Until recently, they were still doing that. They still are sometimes, but it's not like it was.
But you've investigated 800 plus
More than
UFO
that.
reports now.
844. I closed a case yesterday, I think. So we're into the 840s, and that doesn't include the experiencer cases I've worked on for the ERT. That's 200 more cases. So we're but I love it, and it's my life's passion,
But when you're doing the investigations, do you struggle with your own, because as an investigator you have to see if someone else's witness is impressionable in some way, right? But what about you? I mean, are you impressionable because you had those influences when you were younger, you have a belief system, whatever that might be? How do you catch yourself from falling into a trap of believing something?
I'm very, very blessed to have had amazing mentors. Jeff Krause was a state director when I started as a field investigator, and he personally mentored me. I think that he saw my future when he saw that I had a propensity for this. And he kind of overlooked, he kept on, sometimes he'd give me 10 cases in a week, and now when you talk about a UFO case, though, I mean, oftentimes it'll take me 2 minutes, 3 minutes to figure out what it was. As soon as I see the video, I see a hobby drone, because I know what the lights look like. I know what the timing of it is. A Mylar balloon is always going to look like a Mylar balloon. So there's certain cases. Now I'm sweet to everybody. I don't want to burst anybody's Mylar balloon, right? And if it's not actually my case, sometimes I'll just kind of, I won't say anything. Oh, that's cool. I won't go after them and say, hey, that's a balloon. But you sort of get to where you notice markers in the actual cases, and the good cases are weird. I mean, the good cases always seem to have some strangeness about them, and there's some personal effect. How many times I've heard the story of people where they see something in the sky, and the little kid will point up and go, "What's that?" And the parent will look up and go, "What is that?" And it's almost like as soon as they notice it, there's this connection that happens. And the next thing they know, it's right over them, Yeah. And some of those cases, people are abducted. Some of those cases, it's just a close encounter where but there always seems to be certain markers to a real UFO experience. The Oz effect happens in any close encounter, where things get hyper quiet. Time seems like, I'll hear people say, well, it seemed like, I think it was only like 5 minutes, but in some ways it seemed like an hour. Time becomes sort of malleable and stretched out and strange. And you just get so that you notice certain markers, and I look for those. There's things I actually keep from the public that I look for in cases, and I see them over and over and over, and the good cases are just, they're always mind-blowing, and that's what keeps me going.
Well, how do we know the difference between, because abduction cases, there's a lot of people who claim to have been abducted, and they can't
a lot of
all
people
be,
have
they can't
been, though.
Yeah, but
I don't know.
can't,
how do you know?
they can't, right? Can they all be true is what I'm wondering. And
I think a lot that happens in the theater of the person's mind under the influence of the being that they're in the presence of. Right. Yeah. My friend Greg Bishop, he likes to tell a story where Jacques Vallée, there was a pilot that came to him with a case, and he saw this perfect disc underneath his jet when he was flying. And he had a old school Polaroid camera. He took a photograph, and they came in for a landing, and he opened up the photograph. What he saw was a perfect disc, and what was on the Polaroid was the 6 fingered, like a star, So it was totally different than what he saw. And sometimes,
well, that could be an effect, a lensing effect of some sort, right? Like a refraction of the light. So if it was like a really bright UFO, then, or do you think that it was
doing
screen
memories of 5-foot tall owls. There's no such thing as a 4 or 5 foot tall white owl, but people will be left with screen memories like that.
Yeah, yeah. Of course, if there's a Bigfoot, why couldn't there be a super tall owl? Like, maybe that's another cryptid for all we know. But that's so MUFON. When people think of MUFON, they think of investigating UFOs, sightings, and some abductions. But for some, even though MUFON considers itself like a science-based investigative organization, using scientific methodology developed by Jacques Vallée and integrated with Hynek's work and other researchers over the years who put all this together, and yet it's okay to talk about alien abduction and really very strange things that otherwise a psychologist would just say the person's imagining it or there's some other issue there. What is it about it over the years that allows MUFON and other organizations and investigators to continue to take it seriously?
Well, I had an experience myself. My wife and I, when I first became a field investigator, and there was a stigma behind it. This was about 8 years ago now. And for a long time, the only people I would tell about would be new field investigators, because I felt like I owed them that little caveat, that little heads up. Just be aware that this isn't a dormant, long distance kind of thing, this phenomena. It gets personal, and sometimes if you poke at it, it'll poke back, but those were the only people I talked to about it, because I felt embarrassed. I felt afraid of ridicule. I met Kathleen Martin, and I told her about what happened to my wife and I. We had aliens come through the wall, more or less. I was paralyzed. They took blood and DNA from me. My wife was dead, asleep next to me, and never came to until I could finally move again, and it was all over. And she didn't believe me. She thought I was, oh my God, you're hanging out with these crazy UFO people. Is this what I have to look forward to? And I just kind of fetal positioned there and, shut my mouth. But 2 nights later, she's shaken me. Again, our room was flooded with light. The Oz effect was taking place, and it was still happening. She was moving around, pacing next to the bed, and the room was flooded with light with no source. And that's impossible. And thank God my wife, she remembers that, and she doesn't remember seeing beings, but she remembers the light flooding the room. And what she told me was, she said, she said, you need to tell your little friends to leave us alone. I don't need this in my life. I didn't ask for this. And, it was kind of like my fault, is the way. And 2 nights after that, we both woke up to our room flooded with light. No, you couldn't hear crickets. It was so silent. It was more silent than silent. But there was light coming from outside of the window too. We had blinds like this, and we opened the blinds, and you couldn't see it was over the house. It was perfectly quiet. It wasn't a police helicopter, but yet there was this light shining down over our house. And it was also like, it was present in our house, almost like bioluminescence that you see, with certain oceanic creatures and stuff. It is like this light with no source.
Right.
That's impossible.
Yeah.
But they bring their own physics with them. I think they create a space. That's what happens when you feel the Oz effect. I've got PhDs that have experienced this. I've got aerospace engineers, doctors, scientists. It's not just a bunch of hicks and people off the street. Important people and people that you respect. Erudite men and women have experienced this thing. And I'll tell you, experiences run the gamut. For some, especially in the military, the beings can be quite aggressive. They seem to be more aggressive if there's a past in the military or if they're currently in the military. I think that they see those people as warrior caste. I think if the Pentagon is invested in a investigation like what happened over at Skinwalker Ranch with everything there, especially in the early days, it seemed kind of aggressive. And well, we find out that, Harry Reid is who, funded that whole
behind that.
investigation. Yeah. So it was a Pentagon funded investigation of the phenomenon. But other people will talk about like these benevolent experiences, or they'll have a tete-a-tete conversation with something that looks like a praying mantis. I mean, I have one other, fellow field investigator I've known for years, very close friend, not a crazy person. He's very intelligent. He's an author, hasn't written about this, but he was taken into a craft and met this creature that looked like a praying mantis, and it scared him, because he'd seen National Geographic films where praying mantises would do certain scary things,
devour themselves, right?
Yeah. And of course, he was given a telepathic message. There's certain markers in common with all these cases. You don't have anything to be afraid of. I'm not going to hurt you. I want to know. They were doing like a CE5 meditation, trying to bring.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
But
they
what's
didn't
up
think
with that?
It worked. They were leaving in this.
Yeah. But I don't understand it, because like it's Tiffany Mack who gave her testimonial in the Half-Light documentary that I had done earlier this year. And Geraldine Orozco discusses this a little bit as well. But Tiffany specifically has like a gray, almost praying mantis type of encounter. And she has that experience where they just she's scared. She asks them, hey, this is not okay. And then they just send this sense of love and calm and serenity over her, and she feels better and this and that. But, this conversation keeps coming up. It's like, all right, well, and even in the documentary, I end on a positive note, but it starts darker, it ends positive. But the fact is, there are people that are taken out of their everyday life, not of their own volition. And
Correct.
I still have a very difficult time reconciling that's okay. Even when people come away from it, perhaps more spiritually evolved or emotionally evolved or whatever it is. So it's like, okay, all these positives, but doesn't need to come that way. And why? Why are we okay with this, or are we not?
I have certain ideas that I think that this is about, and I don't think that it's so much about getting our DNA anymore. I mean, a lot of people will have downloads of knowledge, and I have a TSA agent guy who had all these downloads, and he was told, well, this will come back to you when it's needed. Police officer, same thing, is in his cruiser and had a close encounter with a craft, half an hour of missing time, and started having these dreams every night where there was this gray hand, the kind of a diminutive gray hand with like at a lectern, and taught him 0 point energy mathematics. And this guy was a D- math student, but he suddenly understood. Amazing. Yeah, at the end of a month, he suddenly understood high maths, and then they told him, all right, well, it's going to go now, and it'll come back when it's needed. And he wanted to be hypnotically regressed just to get the knowledge back. He thought get us off of petroleum. This was a police officer. I mean, some of my better cases have been police officers and people in places of authority.
Yeah, it reminds me of Flowers for Algernon, and I think that's traumatic in itself. Right.
Well, people are left with ontological shock, and I'm of
that's
opinion.
A good word.
Yeah. It's a John Mack phrase. It's John Mack used it, and it's when it technically means that your reality that you hold on to. We all have our baseline reality, and that's our comfort zone. Whatever our beliefs may be, we figure out a way to make that part of our little reality and the way that we see, life. Yeah. Well, that's pulled out from under you. I've experienced it, and I went into the fetal position and kind of shook. It shook me. I'm not, it's not like I'm somebody who didn't think, of high strangeness things. But when it happens, I mean, Kevin Day, he had like years where, he started drinking more and was just trying to cloud his feelings because it was just, it was confusing. And that's kind of in the ERT. We get a lot of people where we'll talk with them and we'll help them to, sometimes just talking about it and having somebody who's an active listener, who's not being judgmental and who has a background in this and can kind of answer some of their questions. That'll clear up so much for them. And we do that for people. And for myself, I had to search, thank God, I mean, I knew Peter Robbins just from Facebook, but I got a hold of Peter and I told him what happened to me. And my current state director wasn't having it, I mean, for him, it's like, well, if somebody says they've been abducted, we need to, put searchlights on them and give them the, the nth degree, more or less, like it was like they were a murderer or something. But once this happened to me, I had to tell him, I said, these people already have PTSD, we can't do it to people,
that's the thing.
The word.
That's what I've seen in people's eyes and in their voice. They definitely experience something very real, if nothing else, for them. And so, whatever that is that took place, they should still be treated with respect and sensitively, because even if something sounds outlandish to you, it was real for them. And I think that, of course, you don't want to lead someone on that you necessarily believe everything they're saying, but you have to at least give them the benefit of the doubt, because you can feel it. You can feel it sometimes when you talk to people that this is real. And on the other end of the spectrum, I can feel it when I've talked to people where I think, something's, I don't know if I don't believe them, or there might be something psychologically going on here that, should be addressed.
My healthcare background helps with that, because as a nurse, the first year of nursing school, I recently retired from 40 years of being a nurse. And the first year is the same as a psych tech. So I'm used to seeing people that are having, a psychotic break or things like that. I've worked in I worked in drug rehab clinics before. You get so that you can see, I've had some people that have put in, reports, and it turned out that, I'm talking to them. It's like, oh God, this guy is doing crack, literally. You just notice certain twitches and skin disorders and stuff. But there are, when you talk with somebody who's an actual experiencer, I had one case where it was the mom. She is a clinical psychologist, the husband who's a medical doctor, and their adult son. And it started with a sighting of a V-shaped craft in Southern California. The closer they got to the craft, of course, the odds effect starts happening. It's like, well, I don't know if it was 5 minutes or 10. Well, it couldn't have been that long, because I kept driving, and we didn't stop the car. We're watching this thing, and it turned over. And when we saw the lights on the underbelly of this craft, something happened in our minds. It was like, we weren't talking about it, as though we weren't supposed to talk about it when we were seeing this happening. So we were perfectly silent. Drove all the way home, finally parked, and that's when I said, what was that we saw, And she said, well, I think we know what it was. It was a UFO. This woman started having, she started having abduction or visitations and abductions, and the husband, I spoke with the whole family. The investigation went on for a while, and I still, I'll still hear from people. I'll check up on people, sometimes years and years later. For them, it was ongoing, and she was able to work her life so it wasn't too disruptive. It seems like her sense of wonder has been piqued. But when I first spoke with the main witness, it was just fear. You know, it was what happened to us. You know.
I guess, you know, maybe there's no other. I'm not totally convincing myself, but maybe there's no other way that these beings could make it better for us, because it's so
maybe
paradigm.
The ontological shock, maybe the shock element, and maybe that's the motive. Maybe they're trying to change our baseline reality. Right now, it's very boxed in. I mean, we're living in the days of quantum mechanics, but we still think Newtonian physics. You know, we still think, you know, I mean, it's just very basic. And I think they're trying to change our baseline reality. And what better way to do that? You know,
and so in a way, it's like it like has to be gradual. Then it would seem to me. It's like they're introducing random people over time,
person to person,
person to person,
until it becomes this wave. You know, and now it's sort of, I'm seeing a wave.
But you know what this what this reminds me of, Earl, is kind of the hero's journey.
Yes,
because
it's very Campbellian,
right? Because you're going into the belly of the beast. You're, you know, and the monster is confronting you. You learn something from that, and then you take that wisdom back to the tribe, right? And I see this over and over again. However, in the myth story, it's supposed to be a story, maybe based on real world experiences, but it's a story to illustrate, you know, wisdom and to teach lessons. In this case, if it's real, these are real monsters, for lack of a better word, right? To make that parallel, beings coming into your life and doing this, and that's a little bit different. But maybe that is the methodology that we're seeing here.
I don't think it's a new phenomenon. I'm with that. I think this is just the way that it's manifesting to us now. I'd like to see, you know, if we're still here 100 years from now, and this is still going on. I wonder what form they'll take then. Because I mean, you look at the UFOs seen in the 60s and the 50s. They look like science fiction spaceships from the 50s and 60s. I mean, it seems to track us. You go to the 1800s and they had the same kind of story, but there are these Jules Verne-like balloons that people would see. You know, they even had an abduction of a cow in one story, you know?
Well, but that's the thing, is there are elements that repeat over time. So like there's these general trends, but you know, if we look at old you know, petroglyphs and paintings, we see cigar UFOs, we see cylindrical craft, we see these gray like looking aliens. I mean, even the Irish, I think it's Irish elves, are kind of like big eyed, right? And kind of alien like looking, black eyes, that sort of thing. Or is that Icelandic? But either way, you know, there's those similar. Yeah, Australia. Oh gosh,
we were in the red center of Australia. We took an art class from this one old Aboriginal woman, and she taught us, you know, what certain signs meant that you would see in petroglyphs, and their whole origin story is lightning man came down from the sky and brought fire and civilization and language to humanity.
Yeah,
and it's the same story that you hear in every single culture. The petroglyphs are the same as those in the Southwest. I mean, I'm a desert rat. I love the American Southwest, and I'm used to looking at those petroglyphs, and they're the star people. I mean, it's their spirituality and the religion of all of the Native American tribes, from Alaska all the way, you know, to the bottom of South America, you know.
But that's why I wonder if it. Yeah, that's why I'm sorry. That's why I wonder if it's a mental landscape that we're living, that we can coexist in somehow. It's another reality that one enters in. But then I think, okay, but then there's actual craft that we see, right? There's things that our sensors are picking up, that our cameras, our eyes are picking up. That
and it's not all in the mind.
It's not all in the mind, right? And this is what. It's tactile, right? And this
feel
it makes it very
you
confusing.
feel their skin when they're messing with you.
Sure,
If
yeah.
you've had a contact experience,
Mhm.
you know, and it it's very disturbing. It's not like seeing a ghost or a phantom. This is very physical.
Yeah, yeah. We're running out of time, so I just want to
Ooh.
ask you this. I was listening to the UAP Studies podcast recently, um, with Louis and Jason, and they were interviewing, um, Josh Colhart, and he had made this reference to Rick Doty, right? And
Mm.
how can Rick Doty tell this story about what he did to Paul Benowitz, and not face any criminal investigations? And I it just reminded me of this when you were telling your story of your mother, because you could look at it one way. He's doing his duty, so of course he's not going to be prosecuted because this is coming from the deep intelligence community. They're not going to arrest him for what he was directed to do as part of his duty. The other thing is he's fabricating it all, and so they're not going to come after him because it's just a story that he made up. Or it's true, but in a sense he's almost like a test subject, and the intelligence community is sitting back and going like, okay, this isn't the the hair that broke the camel's back. Like he can come out and say this, and the
I think Doty
mainstream news media is not like jumping on it, and
Yeah.
maybe
Well,
it's a test.
we know he was CIA. You know, he was flashing his badge, and somebody got a screenshot of it once, and it was real. And you know, he says that he's former, but there's no such thing. You know,
That's what everyone says, right?
Yeah. But I think that, you know, my good friend Greg Bishop wrote a wonderful book about the whole Benowitz thing, and he interviewed Doty just, you know, over and over and over again. And you know, Greg's whole feeling is that, you know, you have to remember that if it's somebody who's an officialdom, there's going to be disinfo that you're going to hear mixed in with info, and our job is to figure out which is which. And that's kind of the same tack that I take in stuff like that. So, but I think Richard, some of the stuff he talks about is probably true, and some is probably, you know, to mislead us. But I was actually on the Storming Area 51 show. He was another guest on that. Now I wasn't there in the studio with him, but the UFO bros were the guys that were the hosts of it, and they, you know, told me, "Oh well, Richard Doty is going to be on this too," and I was like, "Oh my god!" Well, you know, but I mean, I think that I don't think everything that comes out of his mouth is BS. I think that, you know, you have to listen to it, you have to weigh it out.
Yeah,
Just remember though that. You know, officialdom does like to mislead us sometimes. So you have to keep that in mind, you know?
Right. see, but that confuses the community, or some in the community.
Yes, it does.
Some get distracted by that, and suddenly you can't believe anything.
No,
right?
that's,
Like it's all a conspiracy. It's all fake. UFOs aren't real. It's just the intelligence community trying to confuse us and the world so that they don't see this really exotic craft.
There was no intelligence community back in, you know, Leonardo da Vinci paintings that have UFOs in them and things like that. And plus, you know, like the Rand Corporation, they used to hand a pamphlet out to new employees. Rand was part of Hughes Aircraft and worked with the Army Corps of Engineers a lot, but they would hand this pamphlet out. You can get it, PDF of it, just like Google it and it'll come up. Rand Corporation UFO document. And this was officialdom for officialdom. It was for people that were going to be, you know, I mean, those are the guys that helped build our underground bases, I found. And so I don't think that it's just to cloud in the waters, except I think that with the public, sure, you know, and I think that some people mislead. You know, a lot of this stuff is very, very classified, And I think some of the things about this phenomenon are so very strange. Maybe my mom was right that, we should be afraid of how the public will react. I mean, if they're like space gods, that's going to affect some world religions and stuff. So maybe the right idea is to be very, very careful.
Although at the same time, if they're interjecting themselves is an attempt to prime us ontologically, then the flip side to that is that you have all these religious people that are creating a whole backstory to these UFOs as being demons, and they're
it's unfortunate. Hey, the Catholic Church has embraced ufology recently. I mean, there is a Vatican UFO library,
Yeah, but there's a lot that are appropriating it into their religious belief system. So it seems to me that that's having the opposite effect, because it's giving these people time to create a whole belief around this. I mean, websites are going up. Shows,
maybe
podcasts.
They have to do that, and they maybe have to do that in order to hold on to their sanity. This is what is that their comfort zone is for people, is their religion oftentimes. So I think before they would try to blame it on demons and whatever, and now it seems like people are trying to embrace it and yeah, I mean, I never saw a conflict. I took pre-seminary classes myself, and I don't think that we're God's only children out there. Yeah. A big waste of space. There's Contact, Sagan's Contact, the film,
No, I definitely don't think we're alone. Of all the major cases out there that you've looked at, whether Roswell moving forward, what's the one case that really stands out as almost undeniable, as a legitimate?
There's so many of them. I mean, Roswell, I think, might be the best. I mean, to me, Denise Marcel actually worked with me as a field investigator for a while, and I'm close to the Marcel family. I know them really well. I mean, on social levels, and having dinner with and stuff. And I know that family. They don't spout malarkey, and there's a lot of hurt feelings in that family because their grandfather and their father, they weren't treated properly by the United States government. Their grandfather was forced to do that horrible photograph with the weather balloon that the packaging was, you could see it crumpled up in the background. But, he had to say that he didn't know the head of security, who is Roswell Airfield, is where they sent the Enola Gay from, for goodness sakes, which ended World War II. He is the head of security of our only atomic base, and he had to go on and be in a photograph that was going to be in national newspapers all over the whole nation, saying he didn't know the difference between a weather balloon and a spaceship. I mean, and that, and the way that they treated that town, that was where they first started closing the doors on the public and started, sweeping things under the carpet. And boy, it was like that, but I think it's finally opening up now more than it's ever been before. We live in the right time if you're interested in this.
Yeah, I mean, besides allowing the news media to slowly warm up to it and report on it, what can an average citizen do to
join
help
MUFON? First of all, go to MUFON.com and become a member. That helps support us. And if you are very, very interested in this, you should go and click on the link. You go to MUFON.com. It says become a MUFON field investigator. That's what I did, and I never ever regret it. It's one thing reading books about this subject and being obsessed about it and watching TV, but when you actually go and investigate it for yourself, I mean, you're asking me about my favorite cases. You'll have to have me on another time. So because then there's so many. I have so many. They're my own cases that I've worked where I know the people and I've been to the sites, and you find evidence. Sometimes you It's a very real phenomena, but the best way to find out is to go get your hands dirty and do it yourself. The MUFON gives you the ability to do it.
And that's great. But besides that, like, what can someone do in the world that they're living in to help kind of society warm up to this and be more open to it? Because I do believe that disclosure will come if you get enough percentage of the populace to say, who demand it from their senators and where else, and say, hey, it's time.
Sure, right. Your senators, right? You know, I mean, Harry Reid is who appropriated the $22 million that, went in to investigate UFOs over, Skinwalker originally and everything around that. Officialdom is interested in this. So write your congressperson, write your senator, tell them that you want more funds spent in investigating this, that it's important to you. We're finding that does help. It does work. And speak about it yourself. You know, it's not something to be ashamed of. If you know this phenomena is real, if you're interested in it, it's the ridicule has gone down to just a very slight whisper. Yeah, I'll still, I'll bump into, Seth Shostak once in a while, and he'll look at me funny, over his glasses or something. And I've debated him before at a table, and I was told I won, but the best thing to do is to talk intelligently about it with other people. And it's certainly nothing to be ashamed about. It's the most important thing happening on the planet Earth. And I think that this has happened on other planets. We're the first. I think that this is the progress. They're used to revealing themselves to other cultures without destroying them. And that's what's taking place right now. It's with kid gloves, I think. Yeah.
All right, Earl, thanks so much. I appreciate you having me on.
My pleasure, Alan. It was great being your guest. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll definitely have to do this again, because I know you have a lot more to say.
Yeah, we could talk about cases next time. That was a funny question. My favorite case, I've got 800 of them.
Okay, so we'll do 100 at a time, and we'll do four episodes. All right,
Captain, my captain.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us for this Coffee and UFOs. Cheers to you. Keep that cosmic buzz going and your enthusiasm for all things coffee and UFOs. And until next time, keep the peace. And we have a couple of exciting guests coming over the next couple of weeks, but I can't say their names yet because you know how things go. And they will be pre-recorded. And as usual, life can take a turn. So we just want to make sure that we get those in the can before I make any announcements. All right. Thanks again, everyone. Peace and love, and live in the mystery.